Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about continuity mistakes and scientific mistakes in the Star Trek franchise. And some people accuse me, why are you only bashing Star Trek Discovery and you didn't do that with the other Star Trek shows? But the truth is I always did that. I wasn't always making videos with my own voice because I'm not a native English speaking. I had to train a lot to be able to speak at all in English. So in the past I did that using compilations. I simply showed all the clips which contradict each other, or I showed some scientific mistake and I simply wrote in the subtitles what's wrong with that clip and so on. So I did used to do that, simply not with my own voice. And now I do that with Star Trek Discovery because it's the most recent one to come out and I watch it, and so I immediately record a review and point out all of these mistakes. If in the future I will rewatch and review some of the older Star Trek shows, I will also point out any of the silly stuff or scientific mistakes or contradictions with continuity in them as well. I always used to do that with compilations and clips, and even in my parody edits I used to exploit all kinds of mistakes like that to poke fun at them for comedy reason, and that's the main reason I'm doing all of this. It's simply fun for me to do as a nerd, as a science fiction lover, and as a lover of science. I do love to point out mistakes just for fun and maybe for educational reasons. If we're talking about the scientific mistakes, maybe it's nice to point it out simply to educate people, and so that's the reason I'm doing that, and also simply because it's funny to me and hopefully it's funny to other people. So all the people who accuse me of being biased against Star Trek Discovery and ignoring the mistakes of the other Star Trek shows, maybe you should look up my old compilations with all the mistakes of the other shows. But having said all of that, I do think Discovery has a lot more problems than the other Star Trek shows, which always had mistakes. There was always mistakes with continuity, but there were much fewer of those. And scientific mistakes and just logical mistakes in the scripts, they were always there, but they were much fewer in my opinion compared to Discovery, because let's say each episode probably had one silly moment or one silly line or some silly technobabble which doesn't make sense scientifically. So if I were to make reviews of the other Star Trek shows, probably I would spend maybe 5 minutes mentioning all the stuff that was wrong, and then maybe 10 minutes to talk about the plot and the characters and all of that. But with Star Trek Discovery, I have to spend almost an hour after every single episode just talking about the problems that I found in the episode. So I have to spend an equal amount of time just pointing out all the problems, the same length as the episode itself. So that's a much bigger amount of problems that this show creates, both with continuity and internal logic and scientific problems. So I don't think I'm biased. I think that's a true problem with the show. That is one of the reasons that fans like me who loved Star Trek, who want to see a good Star Trek show, we don't want to hate on a Star Trek show. I wanted to love this show. Despite all these problems, in the first season I kept hoping it will get better. I kept making excuses for it. I made up theories to try to explain some of the nonsense we saw and so on. So I wasn't against the show. I wanted the show to be good. I want to enjoy the show. I'm not set against it, and I even gave points whenever I saw something that was good. There were some good things in the show. I even loved some bits in it. I loved Captain Lorca. I love the design of the ship itself. I made a whole video about that explaining why. So I don't hate everything about the show, and I want the show to be a good one. I think it's too late probably because there's just too much mess the show created. Maybe it's better off to just finish it and start fresh with a new show set in the future as it should have been. You know, if this show was set in the future from the first place, it could have avoided so much of the problems it created. And also the internal problems, the internal illogic of it, the scientific mistakes, some of the terrible lines such as saying that sonar can be used in space and stuff like that. So I do acknowledge that all the Star Trek shows had problems like that, and if I ever review them I will mention them as well. And I don't think I would be able to point out as many strange stuff in the other Star Trek shows. I mean, even stuff that has to do with the plot itself, not even having to do with the science fiction element of it. And even if we dismiss all the other Star Trek history, if we just look at this show alone, at its internal logic, it still would have a whole bunch of problems. So it literally takes me longer than the episode itself to just point out all these problems. So I don't think it's my fault. I think it's the fault of the show for doing those problems in the first place. Maybe it is being held up to higher standards than the older shows did, because, you know, today people talk on the internet, people share all these problems, people notice it more as a result of that, and so they have to live up to this higher standard of scrutiny, knowing that there are fans who dissect the show. So the fault lies with whoever makes the mistakes. It doesn't lie with those people who nitpick and look for mistakes and complain about them and point them out. It's not our fault that the mistakes are there. It's the fault of the writers. And you know, if the show was more fun, if it was less annoying, then people would be more forgiving toward it. Just like I'm much more forgiving toward all the mistakes in the Orville, for example, because the Orville is a much more fun show, and it's also much more comedic. It doesn't take itself so seriously, and so it's much easier for me to forgive its mistakes. And by the way, I point out the mistakes in that show as well. I make reviews of that show, and I also point out all the things that bug me, so even though I love that show. So don't blame me for doing what I do, blame the problem itself, where the problem starts, with the writers. So you should complain to them about all of this. Don't complain to the one who simply points out all the problems. So that's my response to all the people who complain about the people who complain. So I think everybody has the right to express their opinions, as long as you're not making death threats against people. If I'm not going around threatening to kill the showrunners or something. I'm not calling for any kind of violence against anyone. I'm simply complaining about problems with the show just as a critic, just expressing my opinion, and I'm doing that mostly for fun. It's not, I'm not really losing sleep over all the mistakes in Star Trek. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I do find it fun to talk about it in videos, and people find it fun as well to listen to it. So what's the problem? So I think I have every right to do this, and as long as I see that people enjoy my videos, I'll continue making them. So if you have any problems, present your counter arguments, and then we'll decide whose position is more logical and so on. So that's my opinion on all of this. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we can discuss it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.